Welcome to Hadar's Web, a podcast featuring community conversations on spirituality, healing, justice, and art. My name is Hadar Cohen. I am your host, and I am delighted to invite you to my relational web. Today's guest is Rawan Roshni. Rawan Roshni is a Palestinian Balkan global citizen Arab woman based in Jordan. She uses her voice as an artivist through her singing, songwriting, and facilitation of brave spaces, focusing her work in the Swana region. She has co-founded multiple interfaith and world music projects, and most recently has been touring her solo trilingual live looping music and poetry performance, Al Tuyur, Messages from the Birds, for 2 years across 6 countries and counting. Her facilitation work over the past decade has ranged from issues such as conflict transformation, collective liberation, feminine leadership, catalyzing community, emotional processing tool, conscious relating, consent, and more. She fuses sound, movement, and intuitive rituals as tools in her work, bringing elements such as group singing, sound work through vocalization, whirling dance, and intentional nature-based practices. Welcome, Rawan. So good to have you here on my podcast.
Thank you, Hadar. It's my pleasure. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it really has. And we met years ago. Actually, I don't exactly even remember what year it was. Feels like so long ago,
Mm,
when in some ways the
mm,
world felt so different. And through that,
yeah.
I feel that both our souls and our humanness has just been tracking, following each other and connecting, finding each other in different moments, different ways, and leading to some collaborations even. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, I'm just really thrilled to have you here and to hear more about you and your voice and your work. So maybe for our audience, you can just start by introducing yourself a little bit of who you are, and where you are now.
mm. Sure. So it was mentioned very briefly at the beginning of the bio that I'm Palestinian, and maybe I can explain a little bit more in detail. I'm part of the Palestinian diaspora population. So what that means is that I haven't lived in Palestine. I wasn't born there. My grandparents were expelled in 1948 at the time of the Nakba to neighboring countries. Some went to Lebanon, some to Kuwait, some to Jordan. Eventually, they gathered in Kuwait, where my parents met and where I was born. And then in 1990, with the Gulf War with Iraq, we were displaced again, and we came to Jordan. So I've spent most of my life in Jordan when you add it up accumulatively. And also, we immigrated to Canada as a nucleus family, me, my mom, my dad, brother, and sister, when I was 12. And so I lived there for 10 years as well. So that definitely had an influence on my personal culture, on my education, on my worldview. And after graduating university, so I studied at the University of Toronto, where I did a double major in political science and Middle Eastern civilizations. And right after graduating, I was like, okay, I need to see the world. I need to experience things with my own hands and eyes and ears. So I started to travel and look for a way to enter into Palestine because I'd never been up until this point. I had lived in connection to it through the narratives, through the stories of my grandparents, through our narrative of longing and displacement, through the books and the movies and the songs and the food. And I really wanted to plant my feet there and have my own personal experience. So I went in 2010 for the first time with my grandmother. And really, she took me by the hand and introduced me to extended family, where I got to meet members of the family who stayed, who were not expelled, who, stood that ground. And they took me around a bit. Also, they took me to Khalil, which is where my father's family lineage is from, what's now called Hebron. Um, a multi-layered experience, able to go and nostalgia and also sorrow and some anger, definitely. Um, because as we were moving around, I was seeing for the first time like the checkpoints and the military and the separation, the apartheid system. Hearing the stories, like for example, of my grandmother's brother, so my dad's uncle, and how they had this, supermarket that was on a douar, on a busy traffic circle, and then the apartheid wall came up in the middle of this douar, and so it like completely cut off all the traffic that would usually come through to that supermarket. And I remember visiting the supermarket and looking outside, and it's like right there, like here's the supermarket, and we're looking at the wall. And the way it separated people from their families and from their lands, and even that, or from their income as well. And this was a small example, but one of many. And then since then, I've been many times because I'm privileged to have the Canadian passport, actually. And that's what gives me access, which is very ironic. That it's, yeah, a foreign passport that gives me access to my homeland. Um, and it's my settling in another colonial state that then gave me access to the one we lost to colonialism. So it's like a very weird loop. Yeah, and then as I continued to also work on myself and work on my music and visit multiple times, eventually I found something that resonated with me, with my heart, with my soul, and also this like revolutionary spirit that I carry, which is a beautiful community. I use the word community with parentheses because it's also an interesting word to use in that context because people can't actually fully access each other in order to be a sustained community over a long period of time. But we'll use it loosely, a community that is mixed, that's activists and artists and healers from all sides. I don't want to say both because there's many sides. There's more than two um, of the population living on the land. And I'll pause there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I'm
Mm,
really just struck by that heart-wrenching experience of being able to return home only when you're have access to a foreign passport. I mean, especially when you are like live in Jordan, which is so close to Palestine, and then having to travel
mm,
so far to come to the place so close. And yeah, just how unjust these systems of separation that are keeping so many people, right, and nearby from this ability to see home even. Um,
mm,
yeah, and
yeah.
as I was listening to you, it was interesting when you were sharing, about the intersection of community and art and healing and activism and ritual and all of this intersection. And I wonder, has that something that's been present in your life throughout, or is that something that you kind of came to through your journey, this place of intersection of all the things, right? The spiritual, the political, the artistic. Have those been channels that have been kind of guiding you throughout your journey? Or was
Mm,
there kind of this moment that was like, I want to actually blend these?
mm. I think intuitively they were weaving from earlier on, but there was also an aha moment where I could see how I could fit those pieces together all of a sudden. Um, and they were streams that were running simultaneously. So, for example, when I sat for a Vipassana course in 2012, it was first time I was on a solo trip. I was traveling in India. It was definitely a spiritual seeking experience. And for example, in that moment, I didn't have Palestine on my mind while I'm in India, traveling and seeing all these different cultures, and it was for me, you know. And when I was in the Vipassana, I had visions of this woman sitting under an olive tree. And actually, just a couple days ago, I saw a sketch that I did when I came out of the Vipassana. But it was, yeah, this woman sitting under an olive tree in meditation, and she's wearing the hatta, and there's a soldier like there in front of her, you know, pointing a gun at her or something like this, and she's just sitting there. And there's like roots sprouting from her root chakra, let's say, or from her coccyx down into the ground, connecting with the olive tree. So it definitely, as I've developed my own spiritual connection, so then I get also visions that have to do with my lineage because it's all connected, it's all alive. Or like first time I went to ceremony, which was many years later in 2019. I went and I drank ayahuasca in Spain, and at some point in that experience, southern Spain is so similar in its uh, ecosystem, right? So there's olives and there's figs and there's these dry valleys and
And this photo is
um,
actually in the background is from southern Spain.
amazing. Yeah. And I, at some point, had like a huge purging that was happening, and it was under this olive tree. And I felt that it was something being released through me that was way older than me as well, that this was ancestral, that it was connected to Palestine. And then, you know, at some point, there was this message of like, okay, and I really believe it was the olive tree being so gentle with me and saying, okay, you've done enough on your own. There's more to be done, but it's to be done in a group. It's not to be done alone. Um, so, you know, even in that experience, I was going for my own personal healing, and part of my personal existence and my personal healing is also the ancestral lineage and the political and the social and. So naturally, these streams were meeting in places, and then they would like separate for a while and converge and separate for a while. And then there was this aha moment when I met others that could also reflect back to me how they felt those connections. Like the mirroring there, which is what the tree said, right? She said, you will continue when you have a group. So that mirroring was very affirming. And then it was like, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, I'm not imagining these things. It's not like woo woo. It's a common experience that more and more people are able to share and then build on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I got chills as you were speaking of that story
Mm,
and actually had a similar one in my own way. Where it's
mm,
interesting where you, on the one hand, are looking for your own personal healing, which has to do with ancestral healing. I think there's no other way, right? You can't override your own lineage or your own ancestry. Like
mm,
meeting yourself is meeting where you come from, which is
mm,
the land, the ancestors, and it just is in some ways inherently political, especially if you come from these politicized spaces. And um,
mm,
yeah, and I think it's also so fascinating this connection between the personal and the communal. Because so often I find that actually people sometimes do the opposite, where they don't do the personal healing, they kind of just jump to the communal healing. And then actually it becomes really tough to do this community
mm,
healing because there's so many kind of kinks in the system where people have to meet themselves as well. Um,
mm,
and yeah, but then at the same time, if you're just doing your personal healing journey, it also is kind of can be a dead end road unless you find other people. So just this balance of, on the one hand, right, having the dignity for your own self to find your path and your soul and your calling and your who you are, but then also being ready to meet others along the path and build together. So I'm just really struck
mm,
by this weaving of the personal and the communal, and especially how so often in justice-oriented spaces or even in multi-faith spaces, transformation spaces, this can be a challenge sometimes, right? Where is there personal work to do, where there's communal work to do? How do we navigate that? And I definitely see you as being such a leader in that space of really holding the both, holding my
Mm,
personal journey, and also I'm here to hold a communal journey as well. Um,
mm, mm,
so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this community work that you do because you really do so much. And I'm always amazed across the years, like seeing all the various projects of weaving people. I mean, I remember this maybe was a few years ago, but you were just sharing so much of your own music and whirling and,
mhm,
Sufism and spirituality and femininity and all of this all over the world, really. I was seeing you touring everywhere and different places bringing different medicine. So, yeah, curious a little
mm.
bit about your ways of weaving with community.
Yeah, well, because you mentioned Sufism, I feel to share a little bit about how I found that entry point and what it's done for me on my journey. So I was born into technically a Sunni Muslim family, with variants there on who practices and what people believe and so on. But let's say culturally speaking. And I had a really hard time connecting with Islam when I was younger. Um, and now I can say that I know that that's because of the malpractice of Islam. And this is not only in Islam, in many, maybe all organized religions have been misconstrued, sorry, or manipulated for political aims, or tainted by patriarchy and so on. And specifically for me, this was the point of like, as a woman, as a female, the malpractice of Islam was making me feel a rejection towards it and a resentment towards it. Like, to be liberated, then I have to also push this thing away. Um, so that was a long journey until until I went to my first Sufi gathering in Turkey. And I mean, Sufism is also it's a whole universe, and there's many different tariqas and different levels of conservatism or openness practiced in different communities. I was very lucky to land in one that was super international and open-minded and very heart-centric, very based in that beloved relationship with the divine, lover and beloved, longing, ishq, and very welcoming and warm and safe. So there were people from all over the world in this gathering, and everybody was volunteering, whether as a musician or the dancing or the cooking or the cleaning, and it was already in and of itself a beautiful embodiment of spirituality and communal living coming together. um, and so that was like a huge gift, I would say, and it helped me reclaim my relationship to divine and realize that, like, okay, again, through my experience of seeing others who resonate with what I knew deep in my heart, but I couldn't find a way to practice all on my own. So I had done things before intuitively, where, for example, when I was in Indonesia in 2010, just after I graduated university, it was my first time ever going on like a backpacking trip and being in the wild. And I remember being at the waterfall and being in such awe of like the beauty and divinity in the details that I ended up like singing Quran to the waterfall. Or in that other trip in India that I mentioned, even before the Vipassana, I was in this amazing site that I felt was very sacred. It was like a meteor crater site. So this place where like, wow, something cosmic has happened here. Um, and I felt like, okay, I put down my microfiber towel and I like prayed, and without the salah clothes or like any, like in nature on the ground. So I always felt that there was another way. And maybe it's a bit more of a feminine way also because it has that artistic expression within it of like, okay, I want to sing the Quran to the waterfall, or I want to feel sensually the ground under me while I'm praying and feel the elements that are in this creative energy, which is very different than, in a line behind each other in the mosque, and the women are in the back, and no one can look at each other, and you know, so it was once again, actually, this is the theme today. I feel that when I find others that also reflect back to me and affirm to me that what I was feeling is real and true and that I'm not alone, then it also gives me courage um, to, yeah, to own it more and to practice it with a full heart. Um, and at that time, or soon after, I think I'm remembering the time you're referring to, there was like a year and a half where I was fully nomadic. I mean, I've been traveling a lot in my life, alhamdulillah. My Sagittarius spirit loves to be all over. And I joke sometimes that there should have been like seven copies of me because there's many things I want to do all at the same time. Um, and I had always usually come back to a base, been in and out, and there was a year and a half where I really felt like I was embracing the dervish path, actually, and just had, my belongings with me that I could carry on my back, had sold all my furniture, had let go of any security that comes with having a four walls as a base somewhere, and was following my heart and letting like the wind take me kind of thing. Um, so in that time in particular, it was very liberating. It was amazing. Much lighter on the in the movement. Um, and to be fully transparent, at about 1 year mark of that year and a half, I felt like, okay, I'm tired. I'm tired, and there was this feeling of also the bird that needs a nest as well to come back to. Um, So yeah, now I'm trying more in my life to strike a balance between tending to the roots and spreading my wings, and tending to the roots and spreading my wings. Also for health purposes. I mean, there are people in this world who can do it long term, very long term, like the nomadic life and aestheticism and really fully letting go of the roots or of the attachment, and I really respect that. And I think I'm somewhere in between. I'm a bridge, um, because in order to like stand up for something and to work on a cause, for me at least, and that doesn't mean it's that way for everyone, but I also need to feel the roots. I need to feel the ground, the earth. Um, yeah, I found that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful imagery between the roots and the wings and this balance between the both,
Mm,
which sometimes in my mind I think of as finding the depth within me and then finding the heights, in the world, and this kind of dual process
mm,
that we're tending. When I was reading your bio, obviously love everything that is written in there. But one thing I was surprised to not find is this word mystic, to describe
mm,
you, because yeah, you do have this very strong um, path of divine love and connection to God. So I want to ask a little bit about that actually, whether God is the word
mm,
you use or it's the divine or the beloved, whatever word for
mm.
spirit. But because so much of my work is about how to support people and finding this personal, direct relationship to God. I'm curious to hear a little bit
Ah.
about what that means for you and what your journey with God has been.
Yeah. I think the reason I don't mention it in my bio is because it's so intimate. I find it to be very personal. And I think that part of my mm, resentment that I mentioned earlier towards organized religion was that like it became public law, and it became something that people can enforce onto others or convert people or murder them if they don't get converted or all of this. I was just like, how is this anybody's business? It's none of our business how each person prays. Um, and yeah, so I keep it quite private. And even then when people come ask, it's like, okay, I'll show them a little bit here, a little bit there. And I admire you for like fully claiming that. And yeah, it like gives me tingles when I hear you just name God, like in a public, in the room. It's very empowering. Um, but yeah, my relationship, يعني, hmm. First of all, I notice how over the years I mention like Alhamdulillah and mashallah and subhanallah and these phrases like all day. And yes, it's like culturally a lot of people do this, but I really do it intentionally. Um, like when I notice something I'm grateful for, will remember that and say it and want God to hear me say it. Um, and also to remind others to like let's be grateful for this. Like alhamdulillah. It's not my making, it's not your making. It's actually only allowed by the will of God. So I feel that a lot and it like really humbles me. Um, and sometimes I think one of the strongest Muslim rituals that is present with me is wudu, ablution. So I really love this one. And I try to do it every single time I shower, at the end of the shower, because there's a belief there that like, and I feel it, that the water is cleansing and purifying, and then there's a numerology to it. There's like three times on each side, and there's a system to it, and it's just very soothing and very calming, and it should be done traditionally speaking 5 times a day with the 5 prayers. So I do the ablutions more than I do the prayers, for sure. And I've taken it into other contexts. So, for example, if I'm about to go do a performance or some sort of activity that I know is also sacred work, I do it before I go there to do that. In ceremony, I do this for myself. I do it at the beginning, and I maybe read some Quran, set some intention, and then like I'll do it every time after, for example, a purge or going to the bathroom or something. So I feel that this really like not only cleanses, but also you say within it, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, A'udhu Billah min Shaitanir Rajim. So you're calling in divine protection and warding away anything that is you know harmful or poisonous. So this is one of the big ones. Um, and I also have another connection, um, which is pre-Islam. And I talk about this a lot less. But I have a very strong call, and it's been unfolding over the years without like, because also it's connection to divine feminine, and to the goddesses of our region prior to the Abrahamic religions and the male prophets that came down to deliver them. Um, so yeah, because it's a connection with the divine feminine, I don't actually chase it or put much effort. I just keep calling. I just keep saying, I'm aware and I'm welcoming this energy, and I would love, love, love to recover or unearth some of the songs and the chants that existed for these feminine deities. There are temples for them all over our region, whether it's in ancient Egypt or in Iraq, what was Mesopotamia, and this, and even here in Jordan, even here around Petra. There are some temples, and but it's all very hush hush, and everything is locked, and there's a key, and there's someone who has the key, and like metaphorically and literally. Um, so yeah, that's a different also maybe undercurrent. And I don't see them as contradictory. And I don't open up this conversation because most of the time people will say they are contradictory. Like that's paganism and that's shirk and there's only one God. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, there is one. And that one is so creative and can show him, her, themselves to us in so many different ways, in as many ways as we can imagine, and then some. So I believe that all of this mythology and all of the different lineages yeah, maybe lineages is not the right word, but all of the different mythologies, all the different methodologies, all the languages, all the imageries, everything that divine has shown us is true. And to hold that multiplicity, if that's the word, and multidimensionality, and to continue to like expand to include it, include it, include it. Because also I feel that most of the core messages are aligned. We get separated on the semantics, on the differences, thinking that difference means something has to be better than something else. Different is just different. It doesn't necessarily mean hierarchy, right? So yeah, these are some of the some of the links.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I very much relate. And yeah, I mean, definitely with my own relationship to Judaism and finding my own spiritual path, so much of that was a bit quieting this outside world or even the things that I've inherited and wanting to find God for myself or wanting to find the voice and the listening. And, it's like I am a woman, so it's gonna come through that channel. There's no other,
Mm,
how else I can't deny my own body to connect with God. And I think that, yeah, there's been so much patriarchy and so many religions that have made it harder for women to trust their own spiritual, intuitive voice. Because it does, yeah, there's a kind of like, oh, well, that doesn't work, or it's not natural, or it's this, or it's that. But I do feel that we are um, collectively bringing that about more and more. Um, and even
mm,
just with the rise of more women spiritual teachers or just women holding that ground, it's orienting
mm,
people towards that. And yeah, I was really moved when you were speaking about all the temples that are still there all over the region and
mm,
um, that it's also in the
mm,
land, it's also in the bones, it's also in this way of connecting. Um,
mm,
So one thing I wanted to ask actually about that, because you have so many talents and so many gifts. And one way that actually mixes with the spiritual and the artistic is your work around whirling, which you
mm.
teach all over. And yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about whirling and this practice. And, I also relate as being in the spiritual path, but also finding an outlet through dance and through movement. So curious to
Mm.
hear you share a little bit more about your whirling journey.
Wow, great questions to that. Um, yeah, so I always was very enamored by it from a distance. And even sometimes I would like just search online for different artworks, and I love to like feed my eyes. Um, with paintings and images and things like that. And so whenever I would find images of people whirling, I would just be like, wow. And it felt like it was such a far away thing that I could never do. That's like so mystical and so advanced. And yeah, I built it up. I put it on a pedestal in my head. Um, and then it turns out that it's not so inaccessible. Actually, it's something quite natural that our body knows how to do because everything in existence is spinning. And then from that lens, I started to understand that, like, oh, wow, this planet is spinning around itself and orbiting around the sun. And then the moon is spinning around this earth. And you can keep looking out, zooming out, and seeing those spirals and that Fibonacci sequence that's like fractaling in these spirals. And then even down to the most microcosmic level, like if you look into our atoms, the different parts are spinning around themselves, spinning around each other. Sound is measured by hertz, which is spins per second. So then it was like, what? So it really like rocked my world to really understand this movement, this spinning movement. And then my personal experience was that once upon a time at a music festival in Canada, I found myself like just intuitively doing it. It was sunny and the grass was green. It was such a beautiful environment, music daytime. And I ended up doing this with this red, very soft red scarf that I had. Someone had told me a trick of like, oh, keep looking at your hand, like keep this stable point, drushti, for your eyes. So I tried it, and in that first whirl, I also faced fear at some point, like when it became fast and I realized I'm not in control anymore. I was like, what if I fall? And so I was like, okay, khalas, and I just like laid on the grass and let it go, and I didn't think much of it. Um, and then here in Amman, I witnessed a performer. His name is Zia Azazi. He's originally Syrian, but based in Turkey for multiple generations. A professional dancer, exquisite dancer. And so he does contemporary dance and then he fused it with whirling dance. And he was here as part of the Human Rights Film Festival. It's called Karama Festival. And he did this performance and just blew my mind. I was like in goosebumps the whole time for the hour or hour or something while he was performing because he just suddenly also presented me with like a non-traditional version where he was also very animated and very emotional and dramatic and was taking off different layers and then juggling the skirts and then doing things that were kind of dark and I was just like, what? Again. So a lot of what moments with the whirling. Um, and then, yeah, I went to this gathering that I mentioned earlier that was in Turkey, the SEMA. And so I reached out to Zia, knowing that he's based in Turkey, and things aligned in a way where I went to the SEMA gathering, the like Sufi one, and then I came out for a weekend and I went and I did a workshop with Zia. So it was a really beautiful, in total, 2 weeks journey there, where I discovered what it was like to do it in the very soft, loving Sufi space, and also what it was like to take it out of that context and experiment with it and do it with other kinds of music and in more of like a secular space and an international space. Um, and I continued to study with Zia because what happened is after those 2 weeks, people in Jordan saw that I had had this experience, and there was a demand where people wanted to learn, and they're like, "Can you come teach us?" La, la, la. I was like, "I'm not a dance teacher by any shape or form, but I'll share with you what I know." And I contacted him and I said, "Zia, is it okay if I share the things I learned in your workshop?" And he's like, "Sure, but come do a teacher training if you're going to be teaching people." So I did that. I went for 3 modules in his teacher training over the course of a year, and deepened in my knowledge of it on like also a physiological level and in my experience of it. And then I developed a workshop series that I offer. I was more active in offering it a couple of years ago, and then at some point it kind of fell onto the side and I pull it out of my pocket when when there's an opportunity. Like this summer in Portugal, when you and I were at that festival, I gave one workshop and it's always amazing. Like every time I give the workshop, it's so amazing because just to see, first of all, some people that are so natural, like they go so fast right from the beginning, like no fear. And then other people for whom it's a very like nuanced experience and it's gentle and it's deep and it can like make them move internally more than externally. Um, and others who come alive when you put a skirt on them. It's like they're really shy and then you put a skirt on them and suddenly they're whirling dervish. Um, and then also in offering it in that kind of contemporary secular space, it made it very attractive for women specifically. Because in the traditional sense, I've asked. I've gone in Konya, which is like they call it the Mecca of the Sufis or the Mecca of lovers. It's where Rumi lived most of his life, and the Maulawi order is very alive and vibrant and kind of officialized by the Turkish government and all of this. And I went to like the center and I was like, okay, if I want to get trained in a traditional line with you as the Maulawi order, like how would I do that? And they were like, yeah, you can. You just need a female teacher. And I was like, okay, great. Where do I sign up? They're like, we don't have a female teacher. So I get asked sometimes by people who are more like in the tariqah of like, why do you do it in this contemporary way and why don't you do it the proper way and traditional way? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. You have to train me first. You have to give me access before I can teach something. I need to know it, right? Um, and interestingly enough, the most intact female presence in whirling that I have witnessed in my experience so far is Iranian women. Iranian women have a connection with, especially like I saw with more of like the Khorasan style of whirling, which is like a warrior whirling and is connected with the elements. And there's different movements for different elements. So I would say it's almost also, not almost, it seems also like a shamanic practice. Um, and yeah, just to say that whirling is not exclusive to Sufism or to Islamic mystic movements. I did some more research and I found that it existed in many other cultures across the globe. Speaking of like shamanic, it was done by these Wu shamans in ancient China who were actually traditionally female also. But it looked very different. Like rather than having a big skirt, they had these really long sleeves. And so they would whirl and make shapes with their sleeves. In Native American traditions, it exists as a mourning dance. So dance to grieve the dead, and they do it at funerals and at graveyards. And so there's many different iterations in different cultures. So I think it's at the baseline, a movement to synchronize with existence, with the planets and the atoms and every sound. And um, yeah, it can be very powerful and healing. Like I've seen people release a lot of emotions, face a lot of their fears. And then it becomes also a very interesting mind experiment of like, oh, I thought I had a limit there, but it wasn't a limit. It was just another layer.
That's
Mm.
beautiful. You really are a student
Mm.
of life. I love how when something comes your way, you just do a teacher training, you study, parallels all over the world. Yeah, it's
Mm.
really inspiring. And I want to jump from this whirling journey to this other word you use to describe yourself, which is artivist. Um, and
Mm.
combining art, because whirling is in some ways maybe this connection between spirituality and art and ritual and embodiment. But yeah, I want to ask, kind of coming back to this question of how it integrates with activism or politics or what this word, even artivist, means to you. And we'll also get to hear more about your other artworks because you make a lot of really sacred, beautiful art. But yeah, curious about what this term artivist means to you.
Yeah, sure. So activism can take many different forms, and my understanding of activism at this point is any form of action to be engaged with like co-creating our reality. Um, and so that can mean, being out protesting in the street with a sign. It can mean fundraising. It can be lobbying something in the government. It can be many, 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 many different things. And it can be through art. And I think that art is a very powerful tool on multiple levels. So I was asked this question once before, and I just want to like pull up my answer on this one. Um, so it could be through the content of what I'm saying in my art, which for me is relevant, like especially in Tuyur, but also even in previous projects, the interfaith and the world music projects, they had a bit more of a subliminal message of like, let's tolerate each other and celebrate the different ways in which we pray and in the different languages we speak and our different rhythms and maqams and so on. Um, and now in Tuyur, it's a bit more explicit to say things about Palestine and things about the lessons I've learned from my life as a facilitator as well, and from community experiences to bring them onto the stage and to deliver them in music and in poetry so people can also ask themselves questions and see new things and hear new things and um, have some place to release their emotions, to honor their grief, and to feel inspired. So there's like an arc in the content of Tuyur. And then another layer of artivism could be also to use the stage as a platform to also rally and create movements. So since the beginning of the genocide, I've done I think 5 fundraising concerts. Um, one of them being the event we did together also in San Francisco in the Bay Area. Um, and that's like, okay, let's use the presence of people and the attractiveness of the art to also, create actual material support for Gaza in particular. That's where I've been focused over the last year, 14 months. Mm. And this could happen for many different causes. Um, and then what was the third one? Mm, I remember this one. The third one for me also is to amplify voices. So if I'm privileged to have this platform and to have access to the stage and to the microphone and to the audience and to the social media and what voices don't have that privilege that I would like to allow to speak through me? Um, yeah, from an authentic place in integrity that it's not about representation per se, but rather about that like I'm my individual self and I'm also have a responsibility towards my collective. So, for example, on this point, I've turned shows down in this last year if they have any resistance to me naming the genocide on stage. Um, yeah, I've turned 2 shows down in particular. Um, because I know that this is my responsibility to do on this stage, and it's the bare minimum I can do as a Palestinian and as a human in this moment while there's an active genocide happening on any population, but also specifically the population of my lineage and community. No, I will not do a show and not say this on stage. And some of the arguments have been, well, it's not an event that's about politics, and it's an event for something else, and da da da. And I'm like, yeah, tamam, this is my package. Take it or leave it. Um, so these are how, and I think there are other ways also, which are less active right now, but it's like good to name them, is to use art inside of other kinds of activism. So, for example, if you are in the protest, creating a kind of an anthem, like a song, or creating a huge um, art piece that's done with bodies. You know, these ones where like they send a drone up top and like everybody lined up in a way and circled up in a way where they created an art piece. There's lots of things like that. I've seen a lot of people in this past year actually creating kind of installations on the street to really like put it in people's face that you can't look away. I mean, you can, but it's following you. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's art is really in some ways about making a more beautiful world. And how can we make a beautiful world if we're avoiding the
Mm,
pain and suffering of this moment? Like it's just, to me, feels like this contradiction. And as you were speaking, I was also thinking of sometimes, especially in the West, there's this um exotification or orientalizing, or like this way of like wanting Arab art, but not wanting, oh, the politics that come with it. It's too much, it's too exhausting, and like just wanting to take of that beauty in art, but not wanting to take as you were saying, the whole package, what that art is coming to resist, or what it's coming to say, or what it's coming to speak. And yeah, I've just seen that pattern being in the US for so many years, like so many times of, um,
mm,
yeah, this way that ends up really fragmenting.
Hmm.
ourselves, right? Or it's like we can't just give our whatever we're creating devoid of what we're saying or what we're yeah, that kind of broader political action
Mm.
that's connected with it. Um,
Mm.
you brought up Al Tuyur a few times, and I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about what that project is.
Hmm.
I've witnessed it already twice, which is just such a phenomenal show. I've been so
Mm.
inspired by it, by the depth and yeah, the uniqueness and the talent of it, and hope everyone
Hmm.
gets to, whoever's listening, definitely find a show, which you're going to be
Thank you.
touring for many more months, I hope. But yeah, I would love for you to just share a little bit about that.
Mm. Thank you so much, Habibi. So yeah, tuyur quite literally means birds in Arabic, or the birds, at-tuyur. Um, Messages from the birds is the rest of the line. And that's the theme or aim. So throughout my life, I've had like very profound experiences where I feel really connected to birds. And there was, yeah, different journeys where I would see myself as a bird or see my shadow as a bird, or feel that the birds around me were trying to say something or sing something. And one such experience also, I felt like I was gifted their perspective, their bird's eye view perspective. And I came to see that, like, wow, they can see so much of what we do from that bird's eye view, and how interesting it would be to watch humans on Earth and how they move and how they fight and where they get displaced and how they interact with the environment and what the Earth like looks like from above when it's being degraded. So it just was very inspiring, um, and revelatory in that way. So I use this connection with this animal to embed messages. And also, again, once you look with a certain lens, it's like, wow, it becomes so clear everywhere around. So I have this like bird lens now that I see through, where I realize that also as a human race, we've had such a rich relationship with birds uh, over our history. So you'll find birds are mentioned a lot in our songs, in our mythologies, in our artworks, more and more and more and more than I've ever noticed before. I notice it now. And even in terms of our like mythological figures and goddesses, many of them are winged. So Isis is winged, Inanna is winged. Um, I'm trying to think of a third one. Anyways, Isis and Inanna are enough. Um, yeah, and their songs, right? Their songs are mimicked and kind of deciphered a lot. Like, for example, people say the nightingale is like, oh, it's singing for love and longing in the night. We don't know. How do we know that that's what that song means? So it's a very interesting, mysterious connection. Um, One mythological thing also in like Islamic stories, they say that Sayyidina Sulaiman would had like a hudhud bird that warned him that war was coming. Or a long time ago, we would also send the pigeons as messengers and like tie messages onto their legs. So lots there. And what I've done in my show is that I use the looping machine to create a soundscape, including also bird sounds in some of the tracks, sometimes cricket sounds, sometimes thunder, different things. And then on top of that soundscape, I sing lyrics with melodies and I speak poetry. And I call it trilingual because it's English, Arabic, and animal. And so I felt that the more I opened up to my connection with the birds, sorry, the more I could understand the wisdom or the messages that were coming through. And I was also very blessed to be hosted in a place called the Perfumed Garden in Turkey, in southern Turkey. And the place was on this like top of a mountain. And literally the tent I was staying in was called the Inanna tent. And I could see the birds flying over the sea and between the mountains. Peacocks would come watch the sunset with me. Um, so it felt like a bird's nest, specifically an eagle's nest is what I felt, like a big bird. And I believe that my residency there um, was like an integral, like so necessary part for this show to come through. Because I just sat for like a month and they took amazing care of me. And I didn't have to worry about the daily life things. And so I could just really open up to receiving and moving this through me. Because a lot of these pieces were not like, it's not like I was like, okay, I want to write a song about one, two, three. I'm gonna sit here and write it. Mm-mm. That's not how it works. Like some of these things get downloaded in one shot, whole poem in a moment. Other things came, 15 years ago, and suddenly I remember them when I'm working on a certain soundscape. I'm like, oh yeah, what about this melody that I got in the valley in Wadi Araba in 2015? Like, here's where it belongs. So it was a magical weaving experience, weaving and dreaming. And like I also faced a lot of my own stuff when I was working on it, which I think is what made it so authentic and deep. Um, like I would work on it and then face, and artists generally face this stuff where they like suddenly feel like an imposter or like that their work is shit and that nobody's gonna get it, nobody's gonna like it. Who do you think you are? And then like pausing to look at that and be like, where is that coming? Where's that voice coming from? And what is the need? And what is the healing that can come in this moment where there is this like rejection happening? Or getting bored and distracted, stopping, taking a nap, then receiving part of the song in the dream, in the sleep, and immediately emerging from my sleep and being like, all right, let's put it down now before it's gone. So I think these incubators and residencies are so essential for like full pieces to come out, like a full set or a full show or a book or uh, whatever other piece. I mean, it can be done, of course, in daily life. I just think that this concentrated incubator can really make a huge difference in allowing like cohesion and completion of a piece. And then, yeah, since then, it has a life of its own. It's very interesting. It's been performed in Egypt was the first place, then Jordan, Turkey. Well, actually, Turkey was the first place, and the place where I did the residency for a very small audience. So Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, um, Dubai, Portugal, UK, US, and counting.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's a
It
really, really
is.
stunning work of art, truly. And I love how
Mm,
it really brings so many different sides of you into one piece. And the imagery of the
mm,
birds is just so strong. And I think a lot about messages or messengers, because there's so much in my orientation to God or the spiritual path. It's actually like we're constantly receiving messages. It's just, do we accept
mm,
them? Do we see these signs? Do we see the ways in which messengers are being sent to us? And part of, to me, the spiritual path is like awakening to the ways we receive messages, which I
mm,
believe we all receive messages, whatever they may be,
mm,
whether it's from other humans or other spirit beings or whoever it may be. Um,
mm,
but I love yeah, not imagery, but just the languaging of messages and messengers. Um,
mm.
Something that I found a parallel with is something we talked about earlier that I feel like is the theme with how you work is when you do a project, there's also a certain process that you go. So with El Tuyo, it's like the project also invited you to meet yourself in deeper ways.
Mm,
And there was like a self process of facing fears or facing your own self. And we talked about it earlier before we started recording this, but I know you also have that with community work and you do a lot of interfaith work and a lot of bringing different types of groups together to do some transformation, connective work. So I'm curious to, yeah, just hear a little bit about group
Mm,
process. And yeah, and you can share whatever you would like to about that, but the ways in
mm,
which that kind of depth of process and creation and completion and getting into a place of landing and all of that, how that also mirrors and translates to some of this
mm,
interfaith work you do and have done.
mm. Yeah, I would say uh, in a group, there's so much more. Um, so much more wisdom, so much more knowledge, so much more information, and so many more challenges and variables and joker cards. Because, yeah, every single circle is a unique experience, even with the same group. So let's say I'm working with one group for a week long program. Every single circle within that week is a new experience because each person is showing up in that moment where they are. So what's happening inside them in that moment, and then how does that also change the group dynamic? So it's really unpredictable, actually. And I've realized that sometimes a program can finish and we are not complete. And that like social connections and group dynamics are living, breathing things. And so, you know, something also sometimes can be planted and we don't know when it's going to sprout. It just like randomly sprouts 3 years later. So it's very interesting also in that realm to keep faith. So maybe not outspoken in the group, but as a facilitator, I have to also know that I am facilitating in co-creation with what wants to happen in this moment and with what is the will of like divine wisdom and order. Because you can offer the space and offer your spaciousness internally as well, other than like the actual space. Um, and you don't know. You don't know. Um, and I think that there are some really baseline things that have helped in so many of the processes I've been part of. So, for example, consent is a huge one, and it like permeates onto everything. So, for example, from the very base things we do usually with a group before we go into any process, even if the process is a 3 hour process, like today we're together for 3 hours, we don't know if we'll ever see each other again, is to build a container. So to actually have everybody actively agree on what are the parameters of our circle today or our container today. So as soon as people are like engaged, it's like a very empowering. Like, oh, okay, what does everybody in this room need? Or what are the boundaries that are here in this circle? So as soon as people are actually, yeah, actively consenting or like naming what they need or what they won't accept, then they're more present. And really like the whole baseline, no matter what the topic is that we're working on, because it can range from so many different topics, is like what creates more space for more presence of everyone in the group. And sometimes that also, not sometimes, almost always, also includes like a power dynamic conversation and people becoming aware of how much space do they take, how much space do they need, how much space do they give. Like for me, I'll talk about myself. A big learning for me in groups was that I realized at some point that I'm taking up too much space. And this doesn't leave enough space for the others in the group. And so if I really want to embody the desire of like community and harmony and equality or equity and all of this, then I need to also be quiet sometimes. And that's not being shut up. That's me, not me shutting myself up. Like I had to look at this of like, oh, okay, I was over expressing or overcompensating because I wanted to prove that I'm free and to prove that I'm powerful and to prove that I'm like knowledgeable. And then, but that in and of itself is also some sort of prison to have to prove yourself all the time. That's exhausting. And what would it be if I was like assured of my value? How much space do I actually need in this moment? And how much space can I offer to hold and to like allow to be available for someone else to step in? So this is like a personal thing, but this little thing can be like also scaled up big time to our global political system. And that's also the nature of the work, is like to work on the personal and the interpersonal, and then to scale that up so that we can ripple it out into our systems. Um, so yeah, for example, if I'm gonna take from all the things I shared now, like okay, my personal work around when I was working on my performance and I faced things to do with like self-doubt and imposter syndrome, no, 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 no. And then I had this other journey where like interpersonally in a group, I noticed I'm trying to prove something, I'm taking up too much space, la 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 la, whatever. And then I adjusted there. And then yeah, scaling it up, like if I'm in a position of leadership, for example, in an organization or in a community, how can I take these things I learned and apply them there so that my leadership is not dominating, my leadership is not dismissive, my leadership is not extractive, or trying to prove something all the time and ego driven. So it really, yeah, everything affects everything. And so sometimes people will be like, oh, it's a silly thing and it's not relevant. Actually, if it's present, it's relevant. And sometimes we might not know why it's relevant, but if we just stay present with it, it'll probably unfold and reveal the connection of why it's relevant.
That's a great line. If it's present, it's relevant. I feel like that needs to be a
Mm.
poster. Because so often we want to dismiss what is present, but actually, if it's here, it has meaning. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, you are such a skilled facilitator. I feel like this could be a whole conversation on its own, around group dynamics and holding all the various levels on all the different dimensions that are happening simultaneously and
Mm.
what it means to be in space when people have different ancestral lineages, when people have different realities, and how do we create transformative groups that can find and meet each
Mm.
other through, a greater commitment, whether to its political values or to spiritual values. So yeah, you are truly gifted in that realm, and I'm excited for more and more collaborations with you on that front as well.
Me too, حبيبي والله.
Yeah. Um, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to share? I mean, I feel like I've asked you, this is probably one of my longest episodes actually, but I just feel like every question is just a
Mm.
whole well of depth. Um, so yeah, is there anything we
حبيبتي.
haven't talked about that you want to share?
Mm. No, not off the top of my head. Maybe I'd like to mention what we did together in Oakland.
Sure.
Or not Oakland. I keep saying Oakland, but it was actually Albany, right?
Yeah,
Mm.
at Lulu's, which
Yeah.
is an amazing restaurant that everyone should check out.
Yeah. We did a really beautiful event for those who are listening who are not physically there. And now it's history now, but like also, inshallah, soon to be reiterated in a new form. Um, but yeah, it was the first time that you and I had the chance to collaborate on something finally after many years of marination. And it meant so much to me, how we were able to bring the spiritual and the artistic and the political and the personal and the sisterhood between us, and to weave all of that in this amazing restaurant with amazing Palestinian fusion food. And just the audience was so engaged and so moved, and so generous. I'll never forget these people who were going around like giving gifts and soaps and the soap. I still have it. Yeah, and it was just so moving. So yeah, and we raised money. We raised a good amount of money, alhamdulillah. Some, I think, was it like 2 grand or 3 grand?
Yeah, it was almost 3 grand, which
Yeah,
is amazing.
yeah, that we were able to donate to Gaza also. And so I really look forward to doing more with you, inshallah, soon. Everybody keep your eyes and ears peeled.
Yeah. And I loved how we took the show that you've been doing, El Tuyur, in so many different places and weaved conversation in between songs, kind of
Mm,
giving a taste of that. I had someone in the audience who came to me because sometimes for me, I'm just like, similar to you, I'm like, wow, I have parts of me that could be whole lifetimes, like how do
mm,
you manage all the different channels of expression or work that you want to do in a single body? But yeah, just this place of the role of speaking and how words contain energy and transmission and aliveness, actually, which I think was part of what we also gave together, right? Is
mm,
the spoken word element of it and the conversation and the um, this is a separate topic, but just thinking about oral tradition, like what does it mean? Instead
mm,
of reading something to hear something in person, and it has a different quality to it. Um, yeah, I think a lot
mm,
about transmission of what it means to not just carry the words or the conscious level, but to hear what is being passed in other levels as well. But yeah, it was a beautiful
y-
event.
yeah, and sorry, it was cutting up. And actually, I'm realizing now that it was our show that then inspired the way I approached the next couple of performances that I did in the Bay Area because they were all small, intimate gatherings. Even more intimate than Lulu's because Lulu's it was still in a venue with a restaurant and like this, but the other ones were more like community spaces, wellness spaces. It really broke down that fourth wall between myself as a performer and everybody who's there and open to have a conversation. So it started this wave, I think, from us onwards. This wave where like I would finish the show, get off the stage, and sit in circle with everyone, acknowledging that, okay, I brought what I have to say, but you guys have a lot to say, so I want to hear you actually, and what has this brought up for you. So using the art again is as a tool to then spark a conversation.
Yeah. And that's beautiful to
Mm,
hear because that's a lot of my intention also with my art practice is to how is performance not just something that people come to observe, but actually
mm,
is an invitation to participate as well. And um, yeah, I want to challenge the ways in which a lot of kind of modern art is hung on the walls or even shows people come and they listen and then they leave. But what is a way
mm,
that's like, no, you come and then you are transformed by it, and that transformation is processed in that space.
mm,
So yeah, there's more to chat about there. I want to also just share briefly as we're closing,
mm,
how we met, because usually in the
mm-hmm,
beginning of the episode, I ask people how we know each other, but it was a really powerful moment to meet you. Um,
mm,
and yeah, I don't know if we even exchanged that many words when we first met, but there was like I can even have that memory of just like when our eyes kind of locked, there was some like almost soul level transmission
mm.
happening. Yeah, and I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
share more about that, but I always love the way you tell the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, because it's a very refreshing story to me. You opened another section of my consciousness that night. And yeah, we were gathered at a mutual friend's house in Jaffa, and this man is a beautiful facilitator and really like bridges between many different communities. Actually, I don't know how you know him. We'll talk about this later. I'm curious.
Actually, a very
Um,
funny story.
yeah, I have a feeling he's a funny guy. Um, And yeah, like there were many people around, some who I knew, many who I didn't. And actually I had a hard time getting to the gathering that night. I was late. I got on the wrong train. I saw many soldiers all coming back and like being picked up by their family. It was very triggering for me. I remember even I got out of the train and I saw Tel Aviv like in its, skyline kind of, and I had never seen that before. Growing up, this is a side comment, but like it's like I know Israel exists, but I'm not exposed to images of it. I'm exposed to images of like old Yafa and old Haifa, and there's all this nostalgia. So it was quite a shock to my system to see it like in its full modern, lit up city skyscape. So I arrived at the gathering like late and triggered and tired. Ate a little bit, which helped. And then when you and I met, it's like everybody else in the room disappeared.
A true
Yeah,
love
it was like
story.
one of, Wallah. Yeah, yeah, just totally zoned in on each other and like went really deep. We did talk. We did talk quite a bit. And then we really also focused on your lineage and you were telling me like your family has been in Jerusalem for over 10 generations and that you're Arab as well. And at that moment I remember whispering to you like it was a secret, like being like, Adar, are you Palestinian? And your answer was actually very revelatory for me because you were like, I can't really say that. Like, I don't want to take it away. I don't want to be seen as someone who's trying to appropriate a culture, this, that, and that. So you were very delicate and cautious with how you were identifying or not. And also, I wanted to be like, yes, sister, you're Palestinian, Dali, like hug me. Because I feel there's a huge erasure of that identity. Not I feel there has been a huge erasure of that identity of like the Palestinian Jew, like it's an oxymoron, like it doesn't exist when it did exist, and it, they, you, were living together. We're all living together, and we're all connected to the land, and we can look back and we can go into debates about roots and are we Canaanites and are we um, Philistines and are we this and are we that and tamam, and also yeah, there's a
Yeah.
unity there that's been severed, and it
Yeah,
felt
and
like a reunion.
definitely. And I think when we
Mm,
first met, that was just the beginning of my journey around even identifying as an Arab Jew. It was something that
mm,
I was even learning more for myself around what is this identity, because there's been so much erasure of it and just, okay, well, you're just Israeli now, or you're just, who cares about this
mm,
past? It's gone. And I think that part of this identity of Palestinian Jew, which there's a lot to unpack around that phrase, um,
mm,
but part of why it also feels kind of impossible to talk about is because there's a system of Jewish supremacy. And that's part of
yeah.
the harshness of it, is that it doesn't actually allow Jews to just be Jews in the region anymore, as long as that
Mm,
system is intact. And I think, that's for me how I started so much of my activism and my education, is also learning that part of dismantling apartheid is also, of course, for Palestinian liberation, and that's the core. And it's also Jewish liberation, actually, because
mhm,
there are so many of us who actually belong to the region because we just belong, not because, a Balfour Declaration or the British gave it or whatever, because we were just there and we were,
mm,
living with one another. And that just connection of belonging and to the land has been so severely ruptured. And, obviously connection to Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims and all of that. So,
mm.
yeah. So thank you for being such a part of that healing journey for me as well, of reconnecting with
حبيبتي
myself and my roots.
حبيبتي هدار, it's my honor.
And thank you so much for this amazing podcast. I don't know how long we've been here, but we've been here for a while.
A
And I
while.
just, yeah, really appreciate the level of thoughtfulness to each question. I learned something new actually from each answer you gave, and just feel
Mm,
so much connection with you as an artist, as a mystic, as an activist, as all of these different levels and just always cheering you on with all the projects and journeys that you do with yourself and with others and with God. May they all be so blessed.
Ameen, Habibti, thank
Oh, and just
you.
last question. If folks want to
Mm.
follow you or follow your work,
Uh-huh.
what's the best way for them to find you?
Sure. So I have a website. It's rawanroshni.com, Rawanroshni. And in that same spelling, you can also find me on social media, Rawan Roshni Official, are like the official pages. Um, and with that same name, also YouTube, Spotify, if you want to hear the songs that I've released, different live performances, stuff like that. Unfortunately, Tuyur is not available online yet because it has not been made into an album yet. But inshallah, inshallah, very soon.
Yes,
Hmm.
amen. Well, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for listening to this convo.